Hi and welcome to this SONICWARE Smpltrek tutorial video. This is a quick start guide. This will just serve to get you into the way the Smpltrek works. More advanced features will be covered in a future video. The SONICWARE Smpltrek is a portable production sampler. It allows audio recording through its various inputs and the internal micro on the front. We can create samples with it, we can record audio and loops, and we can then sequence those using the internal sequencer. There's also effects built in, and we can use the device as an audio interface. So let's just take a look around the device. On the front here, we've got a standard 3.5mm headphone socket. On the side, there is a micro USB socket and an SD card reader. So the micro USB connection allows us to use this as an audio interface when it's connected to a computer or a mobile device. Or we can switch it into a mode which allows the device to read the SD card. On the back, we've got standard DIN MIDI sockets for sending MIDI in and out. And then we've got a pair of line-out sockets here, which are balanced, and a pair of line-in sockets, or they can be switched over to instrument and microphone, respectively. There's a power socket and a power switch. So it comes with its own power supply, so let's hook that up. And then we just need to hold down the power button for a second or two, and it will boot up. So this is what we'll see when we first boot up the Smpltrek. This is the home screen. This is where we create our different arrangements for our songs. So we've got tracks running this way, that can be lots of different types, and then scenes run this way. So this is time. As we play, it will move across. In each one of those little cells that we can see is called a clip, and the contents will vary depending on what track type we select. You'll also maybe notice I've got a pair of line cables plugged in the back here. You don't necessarily have to do that, that's just so I can get a nice clean recording for the video. You can use either the headphones or the built-in speaker. So just looking around the device, we've got these touch-sensitive buttons across the bottom here. From the home screen they select different tracks. These two on the end will turn on and off the respective functions for USB audio and external source. We'll come to that in a bit. These numbered buttons above will select our different scenes, so they move us around in time. And then from the home screen and from a lot of other menus on the Smpltrek, the D-pad here will move us around as well. And then we can use OK and clear to select and cancel various functions. We've got a transport control in the middle here with lots of different menu buttons also. We've got these context sensitive knobs, A to D, and also a value knob. These are all encoder types, so they don't have a stop. They have also have a click function as well for selecting different functions. The volume knob here only changes the volume of the internal speaker and the headphones. It doesn't affect the line out. So from the main menu you can see above the meter on the right hand side you've got a V100. If you turn the value, that will change the value of the project volume. This also affects the volume from the line out, so just be aware of that. We've got these two volume knobs here that are for turning up and down the signals coming from the external audio inputs on the back of the device. There's also a couple of red clip lights. So if you're seeing these lighting up, that means we're going over the threshold at the maximum volume that it can record, so we need to turn them down. The same thing is true of the internal microphone. So there's an internal mic here that we can record audio from, and it's got its own volume level. So if I turn that up, you'll see as I start talking, it will flash red. That's warning us that that's too loud, so we need to drop the volume. We've got these analog sync in and out connections here. This enables us to connect it up to other devices without using MIDI. We can use a click to sync things properly. An internal speaker, and then below the screen there's two context sensitive buttons. So at the moment you can see this one says tempo. So I press that. We can change the tempo of our song either using the value knob or by using OK as a tap tempo source. So just a couple of little things to familiarise yourself with the way this operates. It's a little bit difficult to tell from my zoom in, but all the blocks at the moment on the home screen are in a sort of slightly dulled colour, meaning that there's no content there. When they've got something in them, they light up bright. The function button here accesses the text written beneath these buttons. At the moment, the home button brings us back to the home page when it's pressed, but if we hold function and press the home button, we go to system, which gets us to all our settings. Also, whenever you see a knob detailed on the screen with a little down arrow, that means it's to be pressed to access that function. So as I mentioned before, you'll see V above the master output controls our volume, but just above that there's a little V with a slider. If we press that, that changes the balance between project volume and external audio input. So whenever we see a little down arrow with the letter of the knob inside it, that means we've got to press it to access that function. So let's have a look at those menus and things in the transport section just quickly. At the moment, if we press the record button, it'll ask us to select a record mode for either loops or shots, which is something we can do in real time as the system is playing. If you hold function, we go to our sampling menu, which is where we can record samples. If we press this button here, that takes us to our project menu. So this is where we load and save and change settings for our project. Holding function and pressing that button will take us to our pool, which is where we load samples, MIDI and drum kits into the various tracks. As mentioned, as the home button brings us back to this home screen, function and home will take us to the system menu. We can press play to play our sequence, which won't work at the moment because there's no content in here. So play, pressing play and then play again will act as a play pause. Stop will stop our sequence, and then using the function and play and stop buttons we can move backwards and forwards like we can with the D-pad. This button takes us to our mixer where we can set up levels and effect sends, and then function and that button takes us to our effects types. So we've got insert, send and master effects that we can set up. At the moment this button acts the same as OK, so that is going to ask us to choose a track type which we haven't set up yet. But then function and this button takes us to our record source where we can select different record sources from the different inputs. So let's have a look at our different track types. So tracks 1 to 10 that we can select here are freely assignable between these. So we've got a loop, which we can load a chunk of audio and it'll play in a loop. We've got shots, which we can load one shots in. We can play either with the pads or we can set up a sequence to play. Instrument is a single sample that's loaded in that can be played across the keyboard. We've got drum kit, which will load a whole kit worth of drums across the pads and enable us to sequence them. And then MIDI just sends MIDI out of the Smpltrek into an external device. As well as that, we've got these 3 global tracks down here. These enable us to record a chunk of audio that runs alongside everything that's in the sequence. Each one of these has 3 virtual tracks within them. So we can, for example, record a vocal 3 times and then comp the best parts out of it. So we can slice those tracks up and move the sections around to create the best take. And then these 2 at the end, as we said before, these aren't actually saved as tracks in a project. These are just global settings for sending audio in to the Smpltrek so that it will play alongside what we've got in the project. The idea being that if you're playing out live or something, we can get a backing track going while you load different projects up or just while you're waiting to play your gig, for example. So let's start by having a look at the loop type track. So we pick whichever track we want to change the type of, we press OK, and then we get asked which type. So I'm going to select loop, and that changes our display to say loop on the track. Now to load a sample into that, we need to hold function and press this button to get to our pool. We choose sample. I've already got some loops loaded in, which are located in the Smpltrek pool audio folder on the SD card, and that's these drum loops here. So our project is 120 BPM, but let's try this 100 BPM drum loop. So we can move up and down here. We can preview it from here by pressing OK on the little play icon. And then we've got these different types of favourite that we can select. So just press OK. From here we can do all sorts of different things. We can chop our sample into different beats. We can trim the length of it, time stretch and normalise. but we're going to get asked a few of these things when we load the sample anyway, so I'm just going to load and then pick the track that it wants to go into, or rather the cell that it wants to go into, because these different clips can be different on a loop track. So I'm going to load it into there. It will process it for a second. And once that's finished, we'll be able to select the section of the loop we want to load. So at the moment, it's by default it's set to the bars mode, which determines which bit of the drum loop we will select using the BPM and the number of bars. So if I change that BPM by moving this V cursor around onto it down to 100, we should be able to preview. That will be just the first half of the drum loop. And then if we click that again and move over to the number of bars, we can change it to 2. Alternatively, we can change the type of selection here. So if we go to move to our cursor to BPM and press it, we can change this. So we can have it in number of notes, and we can change it specifically in the number of steps. Or we can just do an A-B point, which is just an arbitrary position. Using the A and B cursors, we can select the section we want. We can zoom in and out on it using the D. I know this is a clean loop, so I'm just going to pick the whole thing and then press next. And then we were asked if we want to time stretch. So I know this is 100 BPM and our project's 120, so I'm going to choose yes on the rhythmic because it's drums. Press next. Again, we're asked how many bars and the time signature, etc. that we want to use. So I know this is a 2-bar loop, so I'm going to change that to 2, and I'm going to load. And again, it's going to process for a little bit. And then we've loaded our loop into here. So when we press play, it will be playing at our project tempo. So you can see there's a little line that moves through the scene number at the top, and that's going to tell us when it's going to get to the next scene. So if you keep on an eye on that, you're going to see it's going to go around twice before it gets to scene 2. And then it will stop because there's nothing in scene 2. But this is determined by this setting. So if we move out of our grid and into the margin, we can press OK here, and that gets us to our scene settings. So our scene is set to play for 4 bars before moving on to scene 2. That's why it decided to go around twice. So in here you can see we've got the different settings that we can alter with these 4 knobs, different time signatures. We can turn this scene on and off. And then we've got a home to take us back, but this button here will take us to page 2. So as you can see, we've got 2 different pages of scene settings. So for example, we can clear the scene by clicking on that B, or copy to another scene. So that's how we control our scene. So our scene setting will determine how long it plays for, even if the content within the clips is longer than what's specified. Another way of accessing the scene settings is just by holding function and pressing the number of the scene that you want to change. So that's the quick way of doing it. And we've also got margins on the left. Now we've chosen our track type, we can change the settings for our loop track. So from here we can press OK, we can clear and copy from here. We can also access that the same way as we just did the scene settings, function and track. So that will take us to our loop settings for track 1. So at the moment our launch button is lit below the screen. This means that when we press our scene button, it's going to start playing. If we click that off, we can just pick the scenes and tracks without triggering them. So that's 2 different ways that we can launch different clips. So when launch is on and we've got multiple clips in the same scene, we can just press individual buttons to get different things going without the whole lot starting at once. So now that we've got that loop loaded, if we just move the cursor onto the actual clip and press OK, we can go and see what's loaded into that clip. From here we can preview just the clip on its own by pressing play under the screen. We can zoom in and out on the waveform if we want to, and move around with C. And then on the value knob we've got a pitch shift. So up to an octave either way. And then I believe if we hold the value button down as we turn it, we get a fine adjustment. So this will do it. So without being pressed, it will jump in 100 increments, which is 1 semitone. And then if we do it with it pressed, we can do it by fine amounts. From this screen, if we press the pencil icon, that will bring up all our settings for the clip. So we can load a new sample from here. We can change the sample settings. We have a lo-fi option, which will reduce the quality of the playback. We've got our length, which determines the actual length of the clip itself. So it's 32 steps long in 16ths, so that's 2 bars. And we can copy and clear our clip from here. So it's nice and easy to record our own loops on the Smpltrek. To get this working, I'll just need to show the record settings briefly, just so that we know what we're doing with those. So function and record source. By default, the internal microphone is selected. It's turned down at the moment, so let's just turn it up. We can see we're getting a level as I talk. We can turn monitoring on and off by pressing V. I'm not going to talk as I do that because I'm already recording my voice, but this enables us to listen to the source, and then we can select different inputs. So in this little box here at the moment, you can see the letter A, that is the type. So as we go through, we've got guitar level, so instrument level on the left input, microphone level on the right input, and then line in on left and right, and then line in on left. We've got a USB input, so we can record stuff from like a phone, for example, really easily, and then also a internal recorder, so we can re-record our own content using adding more effects and that kind of thing, just like a re-render. So just going back, there are different level settings here too. So C will control the gain for the instrument, mic, and you can turn a pad on and off, and you'll hear a little click when this happens on the line in. That's a little relay inside that's just switching circuits. But let's stick with the internal mic. So we're getting a decent level there. I could just turn it up a little bit more. Let's see, that'll do. And when we're using the internal mic, the internal speaker is automatically muted. This is to stop feedback. So if you're thinking your speaker isn't working, it's probably because you've got the microphone selected. We can see at the top of the screen there's a little microphone icon actually, which is kind of warning us of this. Any other of the inputs, we can see the little speaker. So that means the speaker's muted, and that means that the speaker's available. We're going to pick the internal microphone. So back on the home screen, I'm just going to go onto this track and make it a loop type track. I'm going to go into that clip and then arm this recording. It's got this banana shaker here. Might be a little bit loud. Let's just turn that down a bit more. No, it's still too much. That's probably about right. So now we can just hit play, and that drum loop will play while we're recording. We can move the shaker and record that as well. Not the best performance. Let's try that again. That's better. So now we can go back and we can play those two together. I'm just going to delete that because there's another trick I want to show you too. So one of the nice things we can do with loops is we can record them in real time over the playback in our current project. So we can use this like a looper. I'm just going to set up track 2 with a loop track, like that. I'm going to hit record. It'll ask me which type of real-time recording I want to do, which is loop recording. So we choose that one, and then all I need to do is hit play, and then whenever we want, we can hit the track number that we want to record onto, and that'll arm that ready for when it loops back round. And then I'm just going to mumble something incoherent into the microphone, and that'll loop as we go around. Real-time recording, real-time recording, real-time recording, real-time recording. So you're not just restricted to like a single bar loop. Again, if we go into here, you can see the waveform I've just recorded. If we were to have chosen a different length before we started, which by the way as well we can hold down and choose in larger increments, which I didn't mention earlier, we can dial it up to say 4 bars. Then when we go back, our clip length is longer. So we could have recorded in a whole section there. It doesn't just have to be one bar loop. So that's how real-time recording works on loops. So you're probably glad to see I've deleted that wonderful performance there, so we're just back down to the drum loop that I loaded in at the start. I'm going to skip over the shots tracks just for now, because I want to demonstrate the instrument track, which is how we create sampled instruments that we can play across the keyboard. So I've just changed that track type to instrument. I'm now going to record a sample. So I've got this melodica in the studio. It's a little wind instrument. I'll be able to create a long sustained note with it, which is something we can loop, because I want to demonstrate that feature too. So we've got the mic set up from before. I'll just turn that back up actually. We're going to go into sampling. So hold function sampling. So you can see again we've got a level meter showing the level that the mic is receiving. So I'll just play a note on the melodica to test the level. That seems about right. So we've got this auto setting here. So when auto's off, as soon as we press start, it's going to start recording audio. And then we've got several different settings, sensitivity settings for the auto threshold level. So that will detect when audio is incoming and then start recording. It's sensitive enough to pick up the clicks of these buttons on the internal microphone, so I'd recommend minus 24 dB for the auto setting for using the internal microphone. So I'm going to press start and then I'm going to play a note and hold it. And then stop. So that's our recording we just created. So we can save that now. We're going to save it to pool, and I'm going to name it. There we go, that'll do. So let's save that now, but it's not loaded it into the instrument yet. So function and pool, sample, pool, and there's our melodica. It might not be the loudest recording in the world, so we can go in here and we can normalize it up to -3 perhaps. And then we get a new version that's louder. So we can load that in to our instrument. You'll note that it's asking us which track we want to load in. On the instruments, the same sampler is used across the whole track. So that's now in our instrument track. So if we go in here, there's our recording, and we can play it as chords. We can transpose our keyboard. And these are velocity sensitive and are routed to volume. And from here we can program in our melody or whatever we want to play with our sample. But for the moment, let's just go back onto the home screen, because there's some more settings in here. So now we've chosen instrument type for this track. We got access to the track settings on this as well. So there's 3 pages here. So we can choose a new sample. There's envelope settings, and then the position settings is how we set the slice of the sample we're using in the loop. The sample note is the root note, so that determines if this wasn't a C, we can change it to make sure that it lines up with C on the keyboard. We can adjust the pitch again in large or small increments here, so we can tune our sample accurately. We have a lo-fi setting again, copy features and clearing. So let's just go back to that position setting. So if we go into here, we can choose which part of the sample we want to use. So we can chop the end off, we can zoom in with D, and then we can turn on looping here. So press this button and loop turns on. And you can see at the top of the screen V is next to start and end, so the A and B move the start and end. If we click V, we're now tuning the loop. So we need to find a section that will loop when it's sustained. There you go, that's pretty good. It's just best done by ear. So now no matter how long we hold our keys or how long the notes are we programmed in, we'll just get a long sustained note. Okay, so we can press OK. And if we want to, we can change the envelope settings too. So again, we can go into here, we can turn up the attack. So that'll fade our notes in. If we want to add a little bit of release, that's just going to fade out based on the loop position that we've got. So we can go back into our sequence now and we can start programming notes, or we can play something in real time. I'm going to change the length of the sequence a bit. So let's go into here, change the length up to 64. Sorry, no, let's stick with 32. 2 bars is enough. We've got scale settings in here, so we can change which keys on the keyboard are lit up. Determines which ones we can play, so the blue ones won't be active. So in this way you can avoid programming in notes outside of certain scales that you've set. So you've got lots of different scales and then a key. So this will shift it around on the keyboard too. But for the moment I'm going to stick with chromatic. And again, you've got the copy and clear settings from here. So now when we move across, we can see we've got different step lights lighting up depending on what part of the sequence we're in. And as we move up and down, our root notes shift depending on where we are on the screen. And if we do that with the cursor, if we do that with the octave shift buttons, we're just going to jump by large amounts. Also, we can use function and the octave buttons, and that will just shift us around again in small increments. So we can place the C on the keyboard wherever we want, so we've got access to an octave at all times. So if we wanted to real-time record a bit of melodica playing, we can either press play and maybe turn on the metronome and just listen to the clip, or we can press play and we're going to get the whole scene playing. So I'm just going to quickly jam something in and see what it sounds like. Yeah, that's not great. But just as an example, so you can see now we've got step buttons lit up depending on where the rhythm is placed within our sequence. But only on the note that we've got selected on the grid. So if that one's those 2 notes, and as we move up, we can see it lights up in different positions for different notes. We don't have to just play them in by hand. We can also sequence them in. So I've got most of this is blank at the moment. If I want to put an extra note in here, I can hit record, and with the cursor keys, I can put notes in. Or if I want to play a long note in, I can just hold OK down and swipe across. So we've got lots of editing that we can do either in real time or in step recording kind of mode. If we press record again as well, we can place rhythmic information in using the step keys from here too on the different notes that we can select on the keyboard. That probably won't sound great. Let's not do that. I'm going to try something different. So let's move up to the E. I think I'm on. Oh, whoops. Yeah, so moving over to the E. Let's dial these in instead. I don't know what I've created here. Oh dear. So yeah, that's a quick example. From here, by pressing this button, you can access the note velocity and lots of other settings. So A will determine what we're editing. So these are all individual per note settings. So note velocity, micro timing. I can shift notes around a little bit. The level of the track is automated from here, and we've got panning and the send level, which goes to the mixer. So if we select velocity, we've got these already programmed in from the ones that we played in and programmed in by hand. We can alter the velocity of each of these notes by turning the C knob. If we want to initialize that particular bar back to 100, we can just press D and that'll bring it back up. If we want to initialize the entire clip, we can press B and that'll initialize velocity for the whole clip. So that'll just erase all those velocity settings back to 100. So that's how editing works on all these. So it's just fairly simple, we just dial in values. So now we've got a couple of things playing at once, it'd be a good idea to check out our mixer. So if we go into here and press play, we can see the 2 tracks that we've already programmed in playing on the bars on the screen. So we can choose which track we want by moving left and right. These ones are empty obviously, so let's turn the level of our melodica down. We can pan it around from here too. And we can turn an EQ on and off. So there's lots of different types of filter. We've got a high pass filter, a low shelf, a band pass filter, a sort of peak EQ that we can add in, high shelf and a low pass filter. So if I select low pass filter, that's going to change the sound of the melodica. At the moment we can't change our settings for that until we go into the sort of deeper settings. So if we press this button here, and that will show us the levels of each of these settings depending on which track we're on. So if each time we press one of these, it will change the screen to show the current settings. So we're on track 2, we can press OK for more details, and that will show us our cutoff and resonance for a filter. So I'll turn the resonance down, and I can move the cutoff around from here, and that enables us to sort of shape our sound depending on which type of filter we've got. I'm going to turn that off again though and go back, and so we can look at the effects send. So at the moment the send is turned down, we haven't got anything on either of them, so I'm just going to turn up the send from the melodica to the send effect. So it's already set up actually by default as a hall reverb. So you've got lots of different types of reverb and things in here, and a sidechain compression that we can set up across a couple of different tracks, and some delays. So if we go through, we can change the mix and turn that on and off from here. So that's fairly easy to understand. So if I were to go back into the mixer, turn down the send for this track and turn it up for this one, there's only one send effect that can be running at one time, but we can send lots of different tracks into it at different levels. So the other types of effect are insert and master. So let's have a look at the insert. This works like a guitar effect pedal. It's going to come between your audio and your output. So we can turn it on and off here. I'm going to go down to C and target that melodica. So as you can hear, I've got a chorus on there. If we go to page 2, we've got lots of different settings for each of these effects. Let's try a bit of delay. So you've got all sorts of different effects types you can tailor. There's an analog delay, which is a bit more sort of warm sounding, vibrato, auto wah, tremolo, and then you've got things like crusher, ring mod, and auto pan. Isolators are like a isolator, and tilt EQ are like a different type of EQ effect that we can add on. And then there's some stomp, rack, and sort of amp type settings at the end as well that we can use on electric guitar and bass. So great stuff. There's loads of different things we can do. We can also target the input, so we can listen to the effects as we record them, and we can also choose to record the audio with the effect on by selecting post effects. So there is a limit obviously of only one send at once, but if we record our audio with the sends on, we can have as many different ones as we want. We've also got the option to go back in and re-render our audio by selecting the record source as one of our tracks and re-recording it, so that we can add more and more effects on if we want to. So it is a little bit restrictive, but we can still layer them up on top of each other. So that's that. And then we also have a master effect, which we've got vinyl, cassette, multiband compression, EQ limit, and maximizer, all going to be things that you can use to affect the overall output of your mix. So if you turn that on vinyl, you can see that we've got all sorts of different noise and flutter settings here to make it sound like vinyl. And same for the cassette. Oh, honestly, and then with multiband compression, EQ and limit, and maximizer are more about just making your sound nice and loud for the output. So yeah, that's effects basically covered. So I've deleted that instrument track now because it was getting a little bit embarrassing to listen to. I'm going to demonstrate the shots type track now. I've got this clap sample loaded up here on my phone on freesound.org, which plays like this. We're going to record it in using the USB audio function. So all I need to do is find an adapter. I've got a USB-C adapter that fits on my phone, and then I've got a micro USB cable which is going to attach to the side of the unit and go straight into the phone. So let's hook those up. Now all we need to do is go into our record source like we did before, scroll over to USB audio as the input. We can press monitor, and we'll now be able to hear this when we press play. And then we just need to go into sampling, like we did before. Stick with the same settings, so this is an auto threshold. Press start and it will wait. And there's our clap sound. I can save that to the pool and give it a name. So I'll just set this track up as a shots track. So we just need to pick a track that we've not assigned to anything and pick shot as the type. And then, as before, pull, sample, pull, and then we've got that clap that we made. We just load it from here, choose the track that it wants to go onto, and we can chop it up as we did before. I'm just going to leave that as it is. And now we've got our clap here. So the idea with the shots track is that you can just use them to jam along with your project as it plays. Alternatively, we can turn on a sequence within the shots track, and we can use that instead. So if we go over into the margin like we did before and turn the sequencer on, we've got a sequence we can program in here. So we just you can press record and you can place bits of the clap in rhythmically like this. So we've also got editing that's similar to the way that it works with instruments. We've got lots of different per note parameters that we can change here. One of them's a bit different to the instruments is the length. So if I wanted this sample to be much shorter, I can trim it down. Just turn that bar down and you can see that the waveform starts to shrink. And then within here, there's other options. We can change the pitch per sample, the velocity as before, micro timing, level, pan, and send. So with the pitch, we can just alter the pitch slightly of each. So let's take a look at drum tracks. So I've got this track here that hasn't had its type chosen yet. So I just go into here and I scroll over to drum and choose that. And then similar to the way we load samples from the pool, we can go to the pool and drum kits is on the end. And I'm going to go to presets, and there's lots of different presets here. I'm going to choose the hip hop one. We can edit it from here, which is something I'll cover in the later video, including making our own kits from scratch. But I'm just going to load this for now, and it'll ask us if we're going to load it into drum track 3, because you can only have one drum track per project. I'm going to choose yes. And when we go into here, I'm going to edit this cell. There's our drums. So each one of the pads has a different drum sound on it, and they're all velocity sensitive. So probably the best way to record drums in is to switch on the metronome. So if I go Functions, System, scroll down to Metronome, and then turn the volume up, and then go back. As we play the clip, we'll hear the click of the metronome. So I can hit record. And our playing is quantized automatically to the 16th steps that are shown in the note and length. If we want more resolution, we can change it up to 32, and then we can change the length. Because at the moment, if we did that, it would just play twice as fast. So we leave that alone for now. But so that's the general idea. So we don't need that metronome on now. So I can go System, Metronome, turn the volume down, and go back. So I'm recording some hi-hats which are on this pad. So I can hit record and just add them in like this. I wanted to. And as before, just like with the instrument editor, we've got this section here where we can go through on each individual note and alter, say, the velocity. So we can make lots of nice little nuance changes. We've got micro timing again, so I can shift things around. Which makes it possible to access all sorts of different timings. And then we've got level and pan and send as we have before. So to demonstrate the MIDI tracks, I've got SONICWARE XFM set up here. I've got the MIDI output from the back of the Smpltrek running into the MIDI in on the front of the XFM, and then the audio out from the XFM is going into the audio in on the back of the Smpltrek. I've also selected the sample source of line in, which is what we've got this connected to, and I've left monitoring off because we've got external source switched on here. So if I play a key on the XFM, we can hear it. If I turn it off, it's gone again. So that's just useful for muting external equipment if we do it this way. I can go down and create a new track type. So select MIDI, and let's go into this cell. It looks very similar to the instrument MIDI editing screen, with a slight difference in that these aren't the same. So we've got MIDI CCs that we can select from here, but then we've just got the same velocity and micro timing as before. But before we do that, we just need to make sure we're on the right MIDI channel. So the XFM is receiving MIDI on channel 2. So we need to go into our system, go to MIDI, and then check our tracks. So track 4 is set to MIDI channel 2, because I did it a minute ago, to be honest. If we go back, though, we need to change this setting on C away from auto onto track. So that will transmit MIDI out of the back of the Smpltrek as per those track settings. So now when we go into here and we play, our keyboard is controlling the XFM. I'm just going to square up this. So we can do just as we did before. We can either enter per note information on the steps like this. Or we can play it in real time. And that is basically it. So it's just sending MIDI straight out the back of the Smpltrek. The instrument tracks and drum tracks can also send MIDI, but this one is dedicated to it as it has that MIDI CC function. It's a bit deep, that though, so I'll cover that in a later video. So that's all the selectable track types covered, but we've still got the globals to look at. So I'm going to leave in the XFM set up so that I can demonstrate the globals using that. I'm just going to go down here to global 1, I'm going to press OK. It'll ask me if I want to enable it, and this will take a little while because it writes a big WAV to the SD card. So I'm just going to let that do its thing. So now that's finished, we've got the globals available as a big sort of waveform thing here. We can go into here, and this is our global section. So across the top you can see the scenes and bar numbers that we can move through using A and C. If I just press play from here, that's the first thing we made, and then if I skip over to scene 2, that's that. So down the side you can see we've got these virtual tracks, V1 to 3. We select them using the track buttons here so that the record icon moves around. So if we're on V1 with the record icon next to it, that's the track that the audio is going to get recorded to. So I'm going to record the audio out of the XFM a couple of different ways so that we've got 2 different takes. I'm going to make some tweaks on the knobs on the XFM as this plays through, and then we're going to do a little bit of editing afterwards just to show how we can comp those takes together. So I need to hit record twice so it turns red, and then I'll press play and I'll tweak away. And then it will process. Then I can select track 2, go back into record mode and try that again. So now we've got 2 takes. The one that's lit up brightly is the one that will play back when we press play. So if we go down to that one, so let's say I prefer the start of the top section, but I prefer the end of the bottom section. So what we can do is we can move the cursor across, we can press V to split the tracks, and then we can shift that highlighted section up. So now I've done that the wrong way around, haven't I? That will play first and then that will play second. So we can record big chunks of audio. It doesn't have to be something over MIDI, it can just be your voice or a guitar or any source at all, and then you can slice them up and rearrange the best parts to play and get rid of the other stuff. So if we move, for example, this part down to mute, by the way, that will then not play. And each of these globals has got 3 virtual tracks that we can record separate takes onto. So I really like it to use to record external MIDI equipment because it means you can create a really long take with lots of tweaks in and then save it down as audio. So that's about it for this first tutorial. There's plenty more to talk about in future videos. I'll cover the deeper aspects then. I really hope this helped you get into the Smpltrek, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And thanks very much for watching. Cheers.